Here, I've got it.
Okay, perfect. Welcome everyone. A very good evening to all the participants who are joining in for a special webinar for advanced off-road techniques with Bret Tkacs. And a very warm welcome to Bret, to you as well. It's a very early morning in the United States, and it's just been an honor to have you with us in this very early morning.
I'm really glad to be here. This is always fun.
All right, guys, so the flow of the meeting is going to be, you must be knowing a lot of riders who are joining in from the previous webinars. It's going to be, first of all, we'll give you a bit of introduction about our company, then we'll move on to Bret, and then he will be doing the presentation about this, the techniques, the off-roading techniques. And afterwards, at the end of the webinar, we'll be opening up the chat box for all the question and answers. So if you want to ask anything, just keep your questions to yourself till we open the chat box for question and answer slide, and then you can just type in the questions over there. So first of all, a little bit introduction about our company, Yacht Tours. We are a motorcycle tour company, and we have presence in 4 countries with 2 offices, head offices. In India, we have it in Delhi, in New Delhi, and the second one is in Beijing. So we have been catering to 16+ superbiking clubs, like Group of Delhi Superbikers, Batch of Seoul Superbikers, and various other clubs in India. Apart from that, the biggest club in China, which is the MZ Superbiking Club from Beijing and Guangdong. Apart from that, we have been catering to various brands of dealership, as you can see in the pictures, BMW, Ducati, Honda, Yamaha, Triumph. So apart from that, we specialize in motorcycle tours in India on the Leh Ladakh circuit, the Spiti circuit. Apart from that, Rajasthan and the Heritage Scenic Motorcycle Tours throughout Pan-India. We have a very good international profile for off-road enduro tours in various countries, in Indonesia, Bali. Like you can see in the pictures, we have few from the last tours, from pictures from last tours. We have done it in Vietnam, New Zealand. We did it in the November 2019 with Group of Delhi Superbikers. In South Africa, Europe, we have tied up with few adventure parks for training programs. Apart from that, we have done Russia, China, and Central Asia. So without much ado, let's move on to the presentation. Let me introduce you to our guest speaker, a little bit background about Bret. So Bret, you must be very familiar about the Mototrek channel. So Bret used to be the host for the Mototrek channel, and he has worked in the US Army Special Forces Command since 2009. So he has been training. Even now, he is right now on the way to train another group of Special Forces Command. Is that right, Bret?
That's correct. Yep, I'm in Colorado right now for the next week of training here. So
that's
yes.
Awesome. All right. And he has recently been commemorated by the Secretary of Defense for reducing deaths by 100%. So without much ado, I'm just going to, Bret, let you take over the presentation. And so you have the controls from here.
Excellent. All right, so everybody here, by the way, hey everybody from India, and I see a whole lot of Americans in here and a few others from some other countries, so it's really cool to have you guys all here. All right, so we've got 4 major topics that we're going to touch on. As you can imagine, I can spend probably an entire day on any one of these topics. So I'm going to give you some of my most favorite top tips, things you may not hear from other people too much about each one of these. So the first one that always comes up, and when this was set up, he says we have to talk about sand and gravel. And I said, well, everybody wants to talk about sand and gravel. So here's the thing I want to address about sand and gravel. I can talk about, sitting on the back of the bike, or how much throttle to add, or how we move around. But the reality is, when you fail in sand and gravel, if that's your focus, that's not the real solution. We all think it's all about technique and where we sit, but it really starts back to a mindset. If you go into sand or you go into gravel, and I know many of you guys are guilty of this, and when I say guys, I'm talking to all you ladies as well. If you go into it going, oh my God, I hate this, I hate sand, it's so scary, you've already failed. That's the first mistake we make, is all mindset. If we go in thinking we don't like something, your chances of success go all the way to the bottom. So you have to first think, I want to do this, and then you've got to find a place where you can do it frequently until you become comfortable. Dropping the bike is okay. Remember this. Every time you fail at doing something, you're one step closer to perfecting it. Unless you repeat the exact same mistake over and over and over again. We've got to get out of that mindset so that we're going, okay, I made a mistake. As you picked up your bike and all your friends are helping you, what did I do wrong? What was different? Why did it work last time and not this time? And then we move forward and we evolve from that. So the first thing you have to keep in mind is that mindset. Now, a couple other tips and tricks about sand and gravel. They're very, very specific. One, and you've all heard this before, so I'm going to say it again, and that has to do with our vision. And we all think, okay, yeah, well, I'm supposed to look ahead. But what happens is when you get into the sand and gravel, and hopefully you can relate to this, as you're riding along and you're in the sand, you'll see one place where the tires go through and they make a nice big curve and a rut there. And you see that and you go, oh my gosh, I'm going to hit that. That's going to be so. Then we tense up. And that's one of the major things that we don't realize is that, and I'm going to try to see if I have an option here to send out where are we at? I'm looking for, I want to send you guys a quick link on something to watch at a later time. So exit full screen, here we go. And where's my messenger? Oh, come on, guys. You got to know where messenger is. Meeting controls. All right, I'll set it after. I think it's because I don't have full control of the meeting. I'm going to send you a couple links afterwards. And one of the things that we may not realize is motorcycles don't like to fall down. If they fall down, it's because you make it fall down. And it's called rake and trail. All these motorcycles have engineering in them designed to keep the bike moving forward. And here's why sand gets so scary. The sand slows down the bike's natural recovery. You tensing up on the handlebars remove its ability to recover. So as we ride down the road, what you got to realize is that your front wheel is always moving back and forth. And the reason why is it's the slowest part on the bike. The back wheel, it's pushing through. That's what the throttle is, right? That's always there. So the front end is constantly going left and right because the back wheel pushes the front wheel and it kicks it out to the side. Rake and trail pulls it back to center. But because it's in the sand and the back wheel's still pushing, it's going to go left and right. And when you're on the pavement, when you're on the highway, when you're on a hard gravel or hard packed road, it happens so fast that most of the time you don't even feel it. You have no idea that it's constantly moving back and forth like that. When you get into deep gravel, when you get in deep sand, it dampens the recovery. So what happens when that front wheel kicks off just slightly, it pushes into the sand and the rake and trail tries to pull the wheel back to center, but because it has a pile of sand there, it's very slow. And then we feel the bike weaving because it's following that front wheel. So we have to stay very relaxed. And that goes back to that mental state. If you think you're in control of the motorcycle, you're greatly mistaken. We are not in control. We are there to give suggestions, to give direction, to advise the motorcycle on what we'd like to happen. In reality, the bike makes that final choice. When you tighten up on the handlebars, and this is usually because you're scared of the sand, because you started off going, oh my God, this is terrible. When you grab onto the handlebars, that wheel kicks off to the left, but it can't come back because you're holding on to it. So now it slows down because of the sand and gravel, but because you've tightened up, it can't recover all the way, the bike falls down. The front end has to go back and forth. So here comes the last part of this little equation, and we can go into more and more detail, but I just want to give you something to chew on. So we get the mental state, then we understand, okay, the bike is in control, not me. Now what we have to do is go, now how do I make sure that I'm not putting too much pressure on the handlebar? Because when you're up on top of the bike, and we're going to come into bike setup, that's one of the topics for today. When I'm up on top of the bike, if all my weight's on the handlebars, then again, I'm not able to allow the bike to move and to adjust and to move or to self-correct itself is what's going to happen. So what happens here, I'm going to share something with you. And most of you have probably seen an episode I did on Mototrek called The Weightless Rider. And this is something I've taught for years. And when I was training in India, I kind of perfected this whole mindset. I've gotten away from teaching formulas. And formula means when I go up the hill, I tell you to move forward on the bike. When I go down the hill, I tell you to move back. When we're in the sand, I tell you where to stand. But the problem with that is you're trying to remember all of these different formulas when really there's one key core concept that fits with all of these. And that's called the weightless rider. So here's what's going to happen. It turns out that when you're on your motorcycle down here, And there's your motorcycle, and there's your motor, and there's happy you. Yay. You're all holding onto your handlebars. Aren't I a fantastic artist? That's beautiful, right? Okay, so here's what happens. We think that above the bike, there's one spot right here where we stand. What happens is you have forces, thrust, trying to push you back. If we brake, you have thrust trying to pull you forward. You always have gravity trying to pull you down. Well, we think there's one magic spot where we sit. The truth is, it's not one spot. There's an area. There's a circle, and I can move forward or backwards in that spot and still be neutral and light on the handlebars. But if I'm standing back here on the back side of my circle, so that circle, so if you think of it, and this is the circle of balance. When we stand up on the handlebars, many of you have risers on your handlebars. That's one of the first things you do is get a nice set so you can stand up and you can be nice and relaxed. What happens is a lot of times you're standing right here in the back side of your balance. You're like, yeah, Bret, I don't feel anything trying to push me off the motorcycle. But the first time you bump a rock or something happens where you grab throttle, what happens is the circle moves. And now you're on the backside trying to get back into the circle. If I accelerate really hard, what I end up doing is I move around in this whole orb or this whole circle of balance. So if I'm going to accelerate, I know that this force is going to increase, right? If I go fast, so what I do is I move my body, and that's why we lean forward on the motorcycle. So as this pushes, it pushes me backwards, so I'm still inside my circle of balance. So what happens is that we are constantly trying to think about adjustments, but this is where, again, the mental state is. You're always looking ahead, and you can't be looking at just that little change in the sand. You have to be looking a lot farther out so you can make adjustments. So you're constantly being active. If you know that you're going to be pushed back, you're going to add throttle, and I have to shift forward first. If I'm going to brake really hard, I move back. And this transfers not only from sand, and then, of course, with sand, we're also talking about lateral forces, side to side, and then the bike's doing this underneath us. And we're always trying to find this orb, this circle. And we're trying to stay inside the circle so we're not being thrown around on the motorcycle. That's everything we teach, everything I teach about staying in control and having a relaxed state of being on the motorcycle is about predicting and making sure that I'm always in that orb. So when you do sand and gravel, remember, the key to this is not necessarily the specific technique right off the bat. It's the mental aspect. When you go into sand, you have to think, this is going to be awesome. I have one more time to perfect my skills, to try this one more time to work on the gravel. I've got to keep my eyes all the way at the far distance, not the rider in front of me, not the wheel in front of me. We're talking like 50 meters in front of me, 100 meters in front of me. So a long ways out, that's where it needs to be. So the bike can move underneath me freely while I balance in my little balance of orb, my little space where I don't get shifted and moved around. We can get into other stuff when we get into the question and answer if you're interested in specifics about throttle management and things like that. But that's what I want you to think about when you think about sand and gravel is from now on, you love it. You enjoy it. You seek it out. You want it. That's what you go riding and trying to find. Right? So that's what I want you to think about with sand and gravel. So that said, I'm going to move on because I know we're going to have a ton of questions. What I don't want to do is end up in a situation where, oh, we need to go the other way. Why is it doing that? Okay, come on, back. We just lost that. Hold on, guys. Let me, there we go. Are you moving that or is that me? Here we go. Should be going to the right. Gosh darn it, people. Am I doing that or are you doing that? Oh, you're still on mute. Huh. Hold on. I'm going to give it back to you. All right. So you've got control again.
All right. So let me move it to the next slide. There we go.
Excellent. Just there we go. All right. Now, one of the other topic that he was very insistent on has to do with riding in hot temperatures. And, you know, I've done this quite a bit. You know, I've ridden in India. We were just talking about where I've been in India and, you know, down in Mumbai and Bangalore and New Delhi. And as we all know, Mumbai is a very, very hot place at the wrong time of year. And of course, that's why I decided to go there and train. Also, I've traveled through Africa, South America, the Midwest, Death Valley here in the States. And so heat's something I'm very accustomed to. And again, during the question and answers, we can talk about very specifics on actual riding gear. Okay, this is the specific thing I'm looking for in riding gear. But trying to carry on with the same theme that we're going on to, right? So I mentioned this whole mental aspect, the critical aspect with sand and gravel, but heat is the same thing. Again, once you start riding, if you go out in the heat and you've already decided you're not having a good time, if you've already decided that you're over temperature, again, you've already assigned failure to what's going on. And the amount of control that we have over our environment with our mind is absolutely tremendous. When we are in heat, the goal, of course, is to cool off, right? We don't want to be too hot. Here in the U.S., I see a lot of riders in the summer, Harley Davidson riders, out riding around, and they have shorts on, they have T-shirts on. Let's face it, when you guys are riding around in India, most Indians don't have motorcycle gear on, right? They're wearing whatever they wear on the street. It turns out that we have to be careful that we don't dehydrate and that we don't evaporate all of the liquid off of us when we're in that hot temperature. And this is one of the issues I found with pure mesh gear. Pure mesh gear feels very good when you're hot and you get a nice cross breeze or a little bit of breeze that comes through because it picks up the moisture and that cools your core. But if it gets too hot and you have too much air flowing through your riding gear, what happens is all that moisture on your skin, all the sweat ends up evaporating and you end up completely stone dry. And when you get really, really hot temperatures that are above your natural body temperature, you start superheating your core and your body. There's no way for it to evaporate the heat. We have to have moisture trapped on us. When I'm riding in those warm temperatures, I wear a jacket that's an actual jacket. And when it's really hot, a lot of times I'll close up the vents just to insulate myself from the heat. And that way, I end up with the moisture underneath, and I can open up the sleeves of the jacket or just some minor vents, so it'll pull airflow through. It'll pick up that moisture. When it takes that moisture and pulls it through the jacket, it also takes away temperature. So it helps cool me down. One of the methods that works really well for a lot of riders, I don't use it much, but other guys absolutely swear by it, is to increase the moisture against their body. And that's where, like in the picture here that he has, you'll see the blue vest. That blue vest is a cooling vest, and some of you may be familiar with this. It's basically a sponge you wear on your body. So you fill it up with water, you soak it, you put it on your body, and then you put your gear on underneath it. The idea is that because the moisture is there, as the wind comes through, it can pull that moisture out and you don't end up as dry as quickly. So it's definitely a good strategy. And then always cover as much skin as possible. If you go through the Middle East, any place where people live native, you'll discover that they cover all of their skin. You go down, they have head coverings and arm coverings and leg coverings because that heat is they want to make sure that they're not just being exposed to the sun. They're basically creating shade on their body. So that's some of the things I think about as we get into heat. So I always wear a neck gaiter. A lot of times I wear a mask over my face. Of course, in India, it's all the pollution. If you're in traffic, that's always nice as well. But it does help shade your body so you're not being roasted by the sun. And that's some of the best things about it. Now, the other little tips that I always take advantage of or that I share with people, I always carry open sandals with me, something where wind blows through them. We trap a lot of heat down in our boots and our feet if you're wearing real boots. And when I stop and I take a break, I always end up pulling my boots off. I pull off as much gear, and that way I can get air to help cool down my core temperature. So that's some of the major tips as far as riding the heat. In the end, it's hot. And we don't have air conditioning on the motorcycles. And so start off with the mental. If you don't go into something, I was in, when I did the class, it was in May in Mumbai. And I don't know if any of you have been in Mumbai in May, but it is, if you can say hot, that would be an understatement for sure. I mean, it is a very, very warm part of the country. but I still wore full gear even then. And that's what really helps save me and helps protect me on that. And of course, if it gets too hot, slow down, cool off, get moisture, get the clothes off to cool your temperature, then put your gear back on and keep riding. So that's some stuff to think about with riding gear. And again, I really want to leave a lot of time for the question and answer. So I'm just trying to give you some key tips, because I know a lot of you already have a list of questions that you want to ask, and we want to give as much time as possible to hit your questions specifically. So let's go ahead and hit the next slide. I did another video on rider adjustments. Some of the pictures are there. What I didn't talk about specifically is that when I get riders that come to my school, like here in the States, I work with tourusa.us. That's the rental company that sponsors the training school and the rental bikes up here in Washington State. Rider setup is, what I end up doing is I do a rider fit. Every rider fit's a little bit different on every motorcycle, and I get questions, gee, Bret, should I do risers? Or, hey, I saw in the video you really don't like risers, and that's one of the most common changes on them. Or should I get lowering pegs? Or should I change my handlebars? And the reality is, each one of us are very different. It depends on your height, on your body type, on your health, on prior injuries. All these things make a difference. I don't have a flat answer, never use risers, never use drop pegs. I just don't do that because there are too many variables. All my answers, almost all my answers start with, well, that depends. But what I'm looking at, there's a couple of things you can check on your bike to make sure you have it set up right. And again, that's a great video for it, and we can talk more about it. But I'm looking for a couple key factors. When the bike is set up properly, one, I should have a nice large platform for my boots to get on. If I end up with a small platform, especially if you're not wearing dedicated off-road boots, and most of you are not, you're wearing either street boots or you're wearing what they call adventure boots. And adventure boots are a nice way to say this is a really fancy dirt-looking touring boot. And they're comfortable to walk in. And if you like walking in your boots, you know it's not a good boot for riding off-road. That's the bottom line. Well, what happens when you sit on that peg is kind of a small surface. When your foot sits on it, your foot bends. And that causes a lot of fatigue. We won't even worry about the amount of injury that happens if you crash off-road. Let's just talk about rider. Again, try to make sure that we're comfortable, that we're in the right mental state, that the bike fits us. That boot flexes around the peg, and that causes fatigue. And so you end up moving around on the peg a lot when you're standing. And we end up putting much larger pegs on it. So we make them much broader. So when you put that boot on there that you guys are going to keep wearing anyways, and you put that boot on there, you have a larger surface area. So it causes less flex, and that decreases the amount of fatigue. And that's the purpose of putting those really oversized foot pegs on adventure motorcycles. That also keeps you from worrying about or being distracted by the pain in your feet or the discomfort of standing all the time. So you want to make sure you have the right boots and or the right pegs. When you stand on the bike, your knees should be able to touch the bike. We don't lock in really tight. When I teach new riders, we lock in very tight with the lower body. But as you become more of a master of your motorcycle, you'll find that your knees will always be in contact with the bike, but not actually squeezing it. They'll all be touching. And that's going to make a difference on the seat and how that's designed, and how tall, or whether you need to drop the foot pegs. If you're very, very tall, then that might be something you have to do. But the handlebars are where I think most riders come up short. To give an example, you're all familiar with the R1200 GS that I ride in the videos. And that motorcycle, when I got it, was absolutely horrible riding off-road. And in fact, even Paul, who you've seen on some of the videos, he's my right-hand man when it comes to training. But Paul even came up to me one time and says, Bret, you look terrible. You do not look comfortable on that motorcycle. And I'm like, no, this is awful. There's something just really not right. And I was adjusting and tweaking and moving around. And finally, we realized on those old BMWs, the handlebar riser is offset, and you can unbolt it and flip it. And it moved the handlebars forward. And it didn't move it much. We're talking like 30 millimeters, the most. And that movement, that small movement was just enough to take it from a bike that I looked hunched on, that I looked uncomfortable on, that I didn't look confident on. And again, if you're not confident, that goes back to the mental. And if I don't trust my bike, if I'm not confident, I've already laid myself out for failure. But once I had those handlebars adjusted forward and in the right spot, the bike felt good, it felt right, and then everything else came back into play. And how I just finished doing that on the KTM, the 790 yesterday. I stopped on the road several times and I kept changing the adjustment. It has about 6 adjustments on the 790. And I'm trying to get it just to the right spot, or at least to the best I can with the factory adjustments. And when I'm sitting, you know, I'm always making sure that my arms have, you know, a little more than a 90-degree bend. I don't want it all tight up here. Then I'm driving around like this, and that's never very good. I want to be in a comfortable position. My hands, my elbows should naturally be in a rise position, so I have lots of lateral movement and forward and back movement. But also when I stand, I want to make sure when I stand and I lean forward on the bike. So again, we talked about that magic bubble. And when I move to the front side of it, so that when I add thrust and throttle and I get shifted back, that I don't end up getting bumped out of that. But when I'm standing above the handlebars, I want to make sure my shoulders don't go in front of the handlebars. If you stand on the bike and it's properly fitted and adjusted to you, and you're standing, and if the handlebars kind of drop behind you in a normal riding position, kind of a forward riding position, like the picture that's up here, you'll see that's kind of a standard position for us when we're riding down gravel roads. I'm not straight up and down, I'm just slightly forward. And the more aggressive I get, the more forward I'll bend. But I want to make sure that those shoulders don't drop in front of that steering axis of the bars, not except for extreme conditions. If it does, what will happen is the steering is behind you, you have no place to hold on, you end up putting a lot of weight on the bars, and you feel very unsecure. On top of that, of course, we adjust our levers and everything else to match that, which is in the video, or you can ask about it when we get to the question and answer session. Let me wrap up why I'm talking about rider controls, because there's going to be a theme here. When I talked about sand and gravel, I said the first thing we have to do is have the right mental attitude when we get into it. And then we talk about how we ride. When I talked about heat, I start off with going, we have to have the right mental attitude. If we don't like the heat, and we've decided that, we're already going to suffer the heat. We have to embody it, to take it in, to accept it as part of our reality and to enjoy it and find the positive in it. And this whole rider setup, yes, control is part of it, but it also goes back to the mental aspect. If you don't trust the machine, if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't know what's going to happen underneath you, then it's really hard to be in that proper mental position. So again, we keep coming back to this because the mistakes we make, the reasons we crash, the reasons that we fail at things has nothing to do with the bike and ourselves. It's how we address things, how we move towards them, how we think about what's going to happen next. And the last topic that we're going to talk on this before we go into kind of Q&A, if you want to go and click to the next slide here, is talking about the bike itself. We all love to talk about the motorcycles, and we talk about motorcycle protection. And this is a small video I did for one of the companies in India. And I'm just talking about the most critical aspects of a motorcycle. And really, it only boils down to what do you have to do to the motorcycle so that if and when it falls, you don't end up stranded and broken. So you're thinking, what's going to break? What's going to leave me there? If you have radiators, you need to protect the radiators. That's where those guards come from. Those of you that have seen the pictures of the new 790 I have, you'll notice there's no crash bars on the 790. And that's because the tank, the fuel tank, wraps the engine down below and protects that. And the radiator is tucked far inside the plastic of the bodywork. I might break some plastic, but I'm not going to break the radiators, not very easily. So that's a protected component. I don't need to add a lot of weight on my motorcycle that makes it more difficult to ride. When I ride the BMW, you saw I had a very small crash guard in front of the engine cylinder heads, but nothing around the bodywork and plastic. Again, trying to keep that very heavy motorcycle as light as possible. When I had the F800 GS, the BMW, or Christina's, you'll notice that there's crash bars that wrap all the way up and around the bodywork on the upper portion, and it wraps around the lower engine, because those are exposed components. If that bike hits the ground, the radiator is wide enough that in a hard hit, it can damage the radiator and leave the bike stranded, and you with it. So think about what is going to leave that bike on the side of the road or on the side of the trail. The key components are the ones that are listed up here. One is handguards. if you fall down, you're going to, the chances of busting a lever are pretty heavy. Now you can put breakaway levers on. I usually put a shorter lever on, which is better for control, but also shorter lever means less leverage, and it's harder to break the actual lever itself. So I always go to a shorter lever. And then on top of that, I put on handguards, go all the way around. I prefer the metal backed handguards, but if plastic functions, then plastic is fine. And it's not just because I'm protecting the lever, because if I do a breakaway lever, that'll protect that. But also if you hit the ground really hard, it's easy to damage the throttle tube for your throttle on the end. So if you jam it up with rocks or dirt or you crack it, then it can leave the bike stranded as well. So I do handguards. Also, if you're riding in trees or wooded areas or really tall plants, to smack your hand while you're riding and end up breaking your hand or injuring it. So I want to have those handguards up and around the top. The other one is when you go over rocks, or if you hit something, or even going on the road, if you hit some debris in the road that gets kicked up, is puncturing or damage in the lower engine case. So I always have a nice good skid guard or skid plate. If you ride just gravel roads, something light is good. Even some of the plastic skid guards are really nice. If you're going to go more serious, really hardcore rock, I live on the west coast of the United States, and we have some of the most incredible riding in the entire world. I just went through Utah. We have boulders, and it's just incredible, absolutely phenomenal. But as you get up on those rocks, if you hit them, the chances of you cracking the engine case or leaking oil becomes very severe, or very serious, very real. And so those are really the three key aspects: protect your engine, protect your radiator, and then protect your controls. And if you have a bike with aluminum shifter, some of you may have, let's see, the V-Stroms or bikes like this that have a little more road bias to them. A lot of times the shifters may be made out of aluminum, and those can often snap off pretty easy as opposed to like a pressed steel. The Enfield uses a lot of pressed steel parts, and that's really a good thing. It's heavy, but it bends, and it bends back very easily. But if you have those exposed components, or putting those components becomes kind of critical. But when you do your protection, think, how can I keep my bike as light as possible and protect myself so I don't get left on the trail? That's what we're really talking about. And with that, those are kind of the four things. Now, the other aspect of this whole protection thing, because I have to tie it into everything or else it doesn't make a lot of sense, goes back again to this mental aspect. If I'm worried about damaging my bike, if I'm worried about scratching it, you're going to scratch it. You're going to fall down because you're going to get tense. You're going to get nervous. Fear will step in. And once fear steps in, it's an inevitable, something's going to happen. And having that bike protected, knowing that that bike's protected, helps you stay relaxed on the machine, helps you stay in the right state of mind, helps you stay positive about what's happening. Because being broken down because you fell down in the gravel on a really hot day, well, you didn't have the right gear on, and then you break your bike and you're stranded there. See how I tied all these together? I'm really good at that, huh? But when you do that, you end up with a really bad attitude. And that's just not fun. That's not why we ride. So those are the four things I want you to think about as we go into the question and answers, because I wanted to leave as much time as possible to do that. And I know that we're going to get just hammered because I've spent time in India and I know how you guys are asking questions. You're always full of questions and everybody wants their question answered. So I'm going to tell you now, chances are we have 86 people right now that are on this webinar, including myself and our host. So that's 84 people. Chances of getting through 84 questions in a whole series of them are pretty light, but we're going to do our best to hit as many as we can in the time we have. And if this is something we need to come back to, then maybe we'll do another one of these in the future. So with that said, I'm going to hand it back to our host, and he can take control here on what questions we have, and he can decide whether he's doing it through the chat or not. Also, now that chat's open, I'm going to share a video link with you. So this one here is why motorcycles.
Bret, you just have to put it in the everyone. You have given the link on private, so just repost it on the public.
No, it's right there. Oh, hold on. No, that one went through. Here we go.
Yeah.
So there's a short video for you guys I did sometime. Some of you may have seen that. That's on my YouTube channel, Bret Tkacs. I'm not stopping videos. I'm just not doing them on Mototrek anymore. I like the freedom to be able to answer your questions more quickly. And sometimes it's just a really short, sweet, question and answer. And so I want to have that opportunity. But that's a great video to watch if you're wondering why am I always struggling and why do bikes stay upright. I'm also going to throw another link in before we go into the question and answer, so I'm going to pull it up, and it has to do with fear. It's a chat I did over in New Zealand this last winter, and let me jump on here and find that so you can all see me. I always left the camera down here because it always looks like I'm looking up at the ceiling when I'm doing things. So I'm going to give you one more link, and then we're going to go into what I'm really here for, which is let's talk about what you guys want to hear about. All right, so it's on to you. They're all yours.
All right, guys. So if you want to ask any questions, please do so on the public chat. Ask questions, and we'll be able to read it out. Tall. Yeah, perfect. So we have our first question from Rishi Agarwal, and he's saying why BMW GS and not the Tiger?
Okay, so what's the question again?
Yeah, it's he's asking that why BMW GS and not the Tiger? Why did you choose the BMW GS as your first bike?
What you may not know is I owned an 800 Tiger XC before I had the GS. What I did is I had the 800G. I've had a V-Strom, I've had small 250s, I'm on the KTM, so I'm not a BMW guy, I'm a rider. I ride the bike that's best for my mission. When I went to, and here's the truth, when I went to Africa, I wanted to make sure I had more money in the bank, so if there was any problems, I would have the money. So I sold my Tiger XC, and I put the money in the bank, so it'd be there waiting for me if I needed it. When I came back to the United States, Christina, my wife, was working, and it was a 5-hour commute. She was working, and I wanted a motorcycle that was very, very good for long distance riding, but I could still take on trips and travel. And the 1200 GS is arguably one of the best road bikes or touring bikes out there. And that's what I needed. So the price was good. The bike did what I needed it to. I could do the off-road riding, and most importantly, it was very comfortable on those long trips. So I went with the 1200 GS. That's how I ended up with that bike.
There's a question from Tall.
After Africa. So
yeah. So there's a question from Tall, and he's asking, I ride almost daily on gravel and sometimes on sand while I commute. What are some drills to do besides simply driving in these type of grounds to increase my skill gradually?
Okay, so the biggest thing about sand and gravel is that the bike moves around a lot, and we have a tendency to want to stay locked in on the bike. So when the bike leans, we end up leaning with it. We're not very quick and responsive. Anything you can do that allows movement underneath your body where you stay up on top of it is going to increase that sense of balance for sand and gravel. This can be anything from trying to stand on a ball to standing on a log that's rocking. If you have anybody that does longboarding, that's where they have the big floats they put in the water and they paddle along. Anytime you can stand on something where there's constant movement underneath you, you're going to increase your sense of balance and change of balance. And that's going to pay dividends when you get into sand and gravel, where you're getting that movement and looseness. The other thing that I'm going to recommend, and I gave you that link about rake and trail, and that's going to answer your questions even more than this little answer here. So watch that video for sure. But open your hands up anytime you get into that sand and gravel. When you ride through it, I want you to go from gripping, because we should never grip the throttle. The only reason our hands are on the handlebars so I can touch controls, you know, the clutch, the throttle, the brakes. It's not so I'm controlling the handling. But when you get in that sand and gravel, I want you to start relaxing your hand and just ride with the grips in your palm. And so you're not wrapping around. Then I want you to ride through the sand and gravel, and I want you to take one hand off the grip as you ride through it. And I want you to go where you're going downhill and see if you can ride through sand and gravel hands off, because most of your sand and gravel is fairly thin. Unless it's really, really deep, and once you want to close your fingers to the hand, so the handlebars don't get yanked out of your hands, you close it around. But yeah, try riding open palmed or more relaxed, or even taking your hands off the controls.
All right, there's a question from Mr. Hugh, Ryan Hugh, and he's asking what to do with buffering on the Adventurer helmet peaks.
Oh, buy a helmet without a peak. Okay.
Or you can just remove it later on.
Yeah, so some of the helmets, I wear the Shoei Hornet, and I wear the Hornet for two reasons. One, Shoei's are very expensive helmets, as you know, but they engineer their helmets in a wind tunnel. And when they built that peak, they build it so the air flows through the peak and creates the proper pressure on the head. And unless you pull sideways and you'll feel some pull on it, many times it's more comfortable with the peak than without. But as far as the peaks go, you can ride with the peak down just slightly, which will help put pressure down as opposed to up. If you ride too high, then it lifts, as you're well aware of. Or you can remove the peak. But otherwise, look for a helmet that's either aerodynamically designed to work with a peak or just remove it. Those are really the only two options for you. There's no secret, tape a feather to it or, put little fins on it. That's just not going to work.
All right, there's a question from Rishi Kapoor, and he's asking, do you advise on 2 sets of riding gear, one for touring, a summer one, and one for adventure? What's your opinion on Acclaimed Badlands Pro?
Two suits? No. You need like 9 suits. You need one for everything, because also depends, what color t-shirt I'm wearing. It depends who I'm meeting. It depends what motorcycle I'm on. And if my helmets change colors, I have to have a new suit to match the helmet. All right, so in that regard, generally I have at least two suits that I have. I have one that's my travel and touring suit, and then I have one that's a commuting suit. And my commuting suit is usually a little lighter weight, and it's very, very easy to put on and off, because if it's inconvenient, you'll end up riding without wearing your proper suit. So that's where you'll see I have Aerostitch, which is an American brand, but I wear that because it's very, very easy to get on and off, and it goes over regular clothes. My touring suit is very similar to the one you see in the picture there. And for me, I look for a touring suit that's better for all weather conditions. And that's the key about a long distance touring suit. That means if I have a Gore-Tex or waterproof liner, I can take it out so I can sweat through the suit and I can get more airflow. And if it starts raining, I can put the liner on the inside. I'm also looking for very extensive ventilation inside of it, but not full mesh. Because as I mentioned before, I want to be able to trap some sweat against my body and just allow air to channel in across the suit. So that's what I use for an international travel suit through Africa. That's what I brought most of the time. The first trip to India, I brought a suit that was just like that. So for me, at least 2, but of course I have a Ducati, so I have to have leather too. So that makes 3.
All right, Eric, Hansel, and Priyanka, they both have a similar question regarding risers. They want to ask that, what do you recommend about the risers? Are they good or not? And secondly, regarding the 390 KTM Adventure, some have suggested an alternate handlebar. So do you reckon that she should get an alternate handlebar, or she should install risers?
Well, Priyanka, what are you riding now? And hi. What's her current bike? That makes a difference on the answer.
390 Adventure.
Okay, so with that bike, you can definitely go with risers. What I do find, and we don't have the 390 here yet, we have the 790, which is modeled very similar. But one of the things I noticed about the KTM specifically is the handlebars, when they come up, they have a little bit more of a bend back, which makes it comfortable on the road. And I prefer a little flatter bar, which is a little better for off-road, and it's a little better angle. For when you put the flatter bar on, it's naturally going to pull it farther forward. For her, and if this is Priyanka, the one I know, then we're not very tall. So adding extra risers is probably not necessary for her. What I would end up doing is flipping the risers that are on the bike, moving it to one of the forward positions, and then rocking the bar up just slightly. Again, the big issue is, are you hunched? If you're on the bike, you should be moving forward, but not hunching. If your back ends up all hunched over, then risers may be something worth considering. If you just moved forward and your body is bent, then that's perfectly fine and okay. Most of the hardcore adventure bikes, the Tiger, the 800 and the 900, the F800 GS, the 790, the GS 1200, most of these bikes don't require risers for most riders. However, when you get into bikes that have more street focus to them, the V-Strom, even the Enfield, when you get on the Himalayan or those bikes, they need new handlebars and or risers.
All right. From VTech, he wants to ask you which boots are better suited for mixed riding, MX boots like Tech 10 or adventure boots like CD or BMW?
That depends. That depends. It depends on what your goal are. If you're looking for ultimate off-road ability and protection, then hands down the Tech 10. But if you're traveling and touring and you're willing to give up some protection, then you can go to some of those adventure style boots, because that's what you're giving up. You're giving up protection for comfort. And as each of us, we have to make that choice. And many riders will go, well, I only ride off-road a little bit. So do I just get a boot that's only good a little bit off-road? The question you have to ask is, when you ride that little bit, how important is that protection? Or how important are the controls or the setup of your bike? Most of us spend most of our time on pavement. But when we go off-road, we like to get really silly. That's what we're buying all this gear for. It's for those moments that we need it, not the times that we don't. So that decision's up to you.
Shalmarie wants to ask, what's the best way to bend the gear shift lever back in place? It's on a 1250 GS, so I think it's aluminum.
Shal, the issue is, and you know this, once you bend an aluminum shifter, they're pop metal. So the chances of bending that back, especially if it's a very significant bend, it's very likely that you're going to end up snapping or breaking it. Otherwise, what I end up doing is I take a closed end on a wrench, and what I'll do is I'll run the closed end, the round end, I'll run it through the shifter so that when I bend it, so as I bend that shifter, the back end of the wrench is the point you're leveraging against, and then the other end on the opposite side is the part that bends. So I can narrow down how much I bend it. If I just grab the whole shifter and I try to bend it, I'm going to bend it right at the pivot point where it mounts to the bike. That's not going to help you with your issue. I would definitely have a new shifter on ready to order if you go to bend that back. And if you do it once, you may get away with it, but it's going to flex and eventually that's going to snap and break. To follow up on that, if you're looking for aftermarket, if you can find one made out of pressed steel, those bend repeatedly without significant damage. You can bend them a lot more. They're much more durable.
Ranjit wants to ask how to train oneself for good vision while off-roading and how to avoid object fixation and distraction. It is my weakness and can cause a couple of falls and accidents.
Okay, read that question one more time for me.
How to train oneself for good vision while off-roading and how to avoid object fixation and distraction. It's been my weakness and caused a couple of falls and accidents.
I have a drill that I use for a lot of riders I train on the street. And what we do is develop our ability to track things around us by changing the way we use the vision and without looking at it. Your natural tendency, all of you, is to look very focused at one point. We don't always pick up everything that's around us, which means that we're also very poor about trusting our ability to track what's around us. And that's what I think has really happened to you, is you're focusing down on things. What you have to do is start practicing off the motorcycle. When you're in a room, or like right now, as you're looking at the screen on your computer, the question is, can you look at that screen, see the screen, and still see what's beside you? If anybody's moving, specifically, what are they doing without shifting your eyes to that? Then what you do, once you get better at tracking these peripherals in all different sides with your vision, while your eyes are pointed where you want to normally point them, start seeing how good you are. Can you pick up and step on things, coins on the ground, dark spots? Can you walk on something without looking down at it, always with your eyes up? When you go down the road, you see something in the road, can you ride over it? You know, not something that's going to damage you or the bike, but if there's something very small in the road, can you ride directly over the top of it without looking at it? Become more accurate about where your tire placement is and where your bike is. And that's going to make you more skillful and more trusting. Again, we're going back to the mental aspect, right? You lack trust, and that's what's causing your issue. I put the link in there on fear. And again, that's one of those things that's causing it. And here's that link again. So if you haven't copied that link off, grab that link there. That one's on fear. And it's that lecture I talked about, and it is what causes us to crash on the road. And it's causing you to do exactly what you're talking about, most likely.
Joe wants to ask you, I'm struggling with sharp U-turns and feeling like the bike will fall over if I turn the handlebars too much. How do I compensate for that?
You know what's fun is every one of these questions ties right back to what we were talking about. You don't trust the motorcycle. The motorcycle wants to turn. When you turn it, the problem is you're telling the motorcycle what to do. And when the motorcycle agrees with you, then you argue, which means you turn the handlebars because you're saying, I want to make a very tight turn. And the bike will naturally lean into the turn and start to track around where you turn the handlebars. But when it leans and starts to turn, you get scared. And then you want to straighten it up, or you want to bring the bike back up. So you're arguing with the bike. You're giving it one message, but then when it tries to do it, you don't follow up with it. This goes back to that whole balance thing that we talk about, where you have different forces, right? So again, when we talked about that, and I'm talking about, hey, we have that orb, right? And you have all these forces that are pointing around you. Well, this is the one you're worried about. When the bike starts to lean, it's gravity that's trying to pull the bike underneath you. Well, as the motorcycle leans this direction, you have to keep your body above that point of contact to neutralize that contact. So it's not about hanging off the motorcycle. Again, that goes back to formulas where you're going, okay, well, if I'm leaning, I move to the outside of the bike. Now, in reality, what you're always doing is trying to find that neutral balance point. If you're turning, the handlebars are turned, and the bike doesn't feel like it wants to fall, then you're over the right point. If you're to the inside at all, then, and you don't trust the machine, then it's going to continue to want to fall. You've got to overcome that fear. You've got to learn to trust and understand what's going on, and stop trying to take control of the motorcycle and make it a partner.
Vikram wants to ask you, hi Bret, you mentioned changing the pegs to bigger pegs for comfort, but wouldn't it change the feel of the bike since you won't have the ball of the foot on the pegs, rather the whole foot? Similar to why we don't recommend risers, it's just changing the basic dynamics of the bike.
No, foot pegs aren't really going to change the dynamic of the motorcycle. It's only changing the platform that you're on. Riding on the balls of your feet is where we start riding. That's the beginner method. And I teach a lot of riders to do that when we first get off road. That way we don't accidentally hit the brake or hit the shifter with our toe. But as we get into more aggressive positions like sand and gravel, if you watch that video, you'll notice that I'm not on the balls of my feet when I'm riding through sand and gravel. My weight is shifted back because I'm waiting for the sand to suddenly slow me down and throw me over the handlebars. So I'm shifted back on the back side of that balance bubble that I have. But also I'm riding on the center of my foot, so I can rock back and then rock forward. When you're on the bike, your feet are constantly moving depending on the situation. We start by learning balls of the feet, but as we get more technical and more advanced, there are times when we want to be on the center of the foot as well. So the platform is to reduce fatigue. It shouldn't be changing dynamics of the motorcycle.
Ken wants to ask you, you prefer the old Mitas E07 compared with the new E07 Plus. Why is that?
We have good news. They are bringing back the E07 in the larger sizes again. So those of you that are fans of the old one, we're getting it back. The reason I like the older style, one, you do get better mileage. They last longer. But also what you'll find is when you look at the tread block, the new ones are very large and they overlap. And that large tread block gives it better mileage. But the other problem is many of the places I ride, it's rock that I'm dealing with or traction. And having those smaller blocks means I have more edges. It's the block on that, or the edge on those blocks. When we think about the tires, it comes around, we have those knobbies, right, on each of the blocks. But what happens is when these knobbies round off, we end up with, that's kind of rounded off anyways, there we go. But as they round off, we lose that grip. That sharp tip, that's one of the most important parts of the bike. That's what gives us grip. And the E07 has a substantial amount of gap in between that, and it has more edges for more grip. So in a lot of situations, that's what I prefer. Exceptions, of course, when you get into mud, that's the big game changer for everything. But even in sand, the E07, the regular one, works very, very well. So I am a fan. I'm still a fan.
Ritan wants to ask, is the Ducati 1260S suitable for off-road riding? Asking this because of the 17 inches.
The bigger the diameter of the wheel, the better it is off-road. That's what it boils down to. 21 is ideal when we talk front wheel. 19 is okay. 17 is a lot more work. And what you'll find is on that 17, you're going to get a lot more movement, but also it has less centrifugal or gyroscopic precession that keeps the bike balanced. And if you're going over obstacles, if you think about this, I'm going to draw another picture for you. If you look at obstacles, what happens is when you have a 17-inch rim down here, turns out that from here down, I can do obstacles and I'm still at a rolling point. On the 17, I'm all the way down here. So what I end up doing is it's much, much harder to ride over large obstacles because it's under that. Once I get up to here, you end up stopping. The tire doesn't go over it if it hits it at that point. Right? That's why we do wheelies or loft the bike to get the front end up. But wherever that axle point is, it's below that point that you get to roll over obstacles. And the 17 doesn't do near as good a job of that. Does that help a little bit? We're good?
Doc Prax wants to ask you, I have a Versys 650. Do I need to change the suspension settings when I ride with luggage? Whenever?
Yes. Okay, anything else? No, just kidding. What I'm going to make, if you guys pay attention to the Bret, so again, if you go on YouTube, just type in my name, Bret Tkacs, and that's my YouTube channel. I'm not going to do any titles or any other fancy branding. It's just me. I will be doing a suspension series going on to that YouTube channel that's going to explain springs. So we'll talk about straight rate, dual rate, progressive rate springs. Why, if the bike feels stiff, you have to put a bigger spring in it to make a softer ride. So I'll be talking about those dynamics. But the basics of what you're talking about has to do with motorcycle attitude. When you're riding your motorcycle, it's very level. And when you put a lot of load on, what happens is the back of the bike drops down and the front of the bike raises up. When you add preload to the motorcycle, what you're doing is adding preload to the suspension here so that you level the bike back out so you get proper handling. That's why we end up adding extra weight. When you take all of that weight off, if you have preload, then all of a sudden your motorcycle is slanted downward. So we take the preload down so that we level the bike off. So we always want to have the proper attitude on the motorcycle, which is keeping the bike level.
All right. A question from Jan Francis. I was your student in Mumbai session, the very first one with Vikrant. How does compression and rebound, especially in the rear, affect the handling of the bike? I increased the compression on my Tiger XCX and also the rebound, and it is a much better handler than before. Does it affect the rake and trial?
No, springs are position sensitive. So springs are what we use to raise the bike up, to lower the bike down, or to change the attitude of the motorcycle, higher or low in the front of the back. Compression settings and rebound settings are strictly damping. What that's doing is just slowing down or allowing the bike to speed up in its motion and movement. If your settings were too soft, if you didn't have enough restriction in your suspension, what happens is when you go over bumps, your bike continues to move, and after the bump, it still continues to move. We want to have enough compression, enough restriction in our suspension so that when it moves over something, it stops and then it becomes stable much, much quicker. Now, keep in mind, the motorcycle needs to have some wiggling room. And I mentioned that in the sand, it's always moving back and forth, but the same is true when the bike is going over bumps and jumps and things like that. When the bike feels rock solid, you actually have slightly less traction than if it feels just a little bit loose. It doesn't feel as good, but it handles better and it's actually more stable. So something to keep in mind. And I'll talk about that more when in the suspension series, when I talk about adjusting compression and rebound settings for the front and the rear. So stay tuned for that video series because it's a much deeper topic than just a quick Q&A here.
Right. And Nakul wants to ask you, do you have an opinion on the Scorpion AT950 helmet?
I haven't used it. So it's only what other people have told me.
And he wants to talk a bit about suspension, compression, dampening, high speed, low speed, custom carving, and spring stiffness. That's a lot.
That's its own webinar. So we're not going to go there because I love suspension and I love talking about springs and high quality springs versus low quality springs. Again, that's why I'm going to do an entire series on that. So stay tuned, keep watching the Bret Tkacs channel, or if you're on my Facebook, or I'll make sure I throw that out on Instagram as well when that series comes out, so you can check in on that. So it'll be coming out over the next month and a half. I'll try to get all those put together and online for you.
Nirav wants to ask you, what tires do you suggest for Tiger 800 XCX between TKC and Anaki Wild?
They're both good tires. The Anaki Wild I haven't used personally. I know they're very loud. They have good traction. They don't last very long, but neither do TKC 80s, especially in India hot weather. They're going to melt really fast. I know that TKC 80s are still a really good tire. They're really good off-road. They're really good on-road. And if you're on a Tiger, though, you have a 21-inch front wheel. So keep in mind that the TKC 80 has a very, very tight tread gap. And that means if you get into mud and things like that, it's not always the best tire for that kind of an environment. If you get tires with a larger gap in them, they can to big blocks, tires like that, you're going to have a little bigger gap in there. So really, it's a rider preference.
George from Mexico, he wants to ask, in addition to the mental aspect, what about the physical fitness? What is your take?
Oh, George, I'm a lazy rider. I don't want to be physically fit. Okay, so as long as you can pick your bike up, we're good. The goal is, yes, you do need to be physically fit. So those of you stuck with the whole COVID thing and going, okay, what do I do to make sure I'm still in condition? What you want to do is, for conditioning, and I teach this during my adventure camps, and I show them some different activities and exercises that they can do. Think of the muscle groups that you use when you ride, and those are the things you focus on. Mostly, you need to be able to step up on one peg, going straight from the ground and straight up to the peg. A lot of riders will transition. They'll go from a stop position to a seated position to a standing position, and that's a mistake. You want to go from a standing with the bike stop to a standing with the bike moving. Your rear end, your butt, never sits on the seat. If you want to practice that or develop that, you can stand like next to a chair or next to something that's high and elevated, and not facing it, but next to it, so that your foot is stepping up and you're mimicking the same distance you would have if you're straddling your motorcycle. And then you can do step-ups, one-legged step-ups, which allow you to build that muscle group. The triceps and the shoulders are things that are an issue. So focus on triceps and shoulders, because we have a lot of movement on the bike. We're not holding it, but we have a lot of shifting and movement. And then always focus on core. So on your midsection, on your abdominal region, and also your low back. And that'll help you better control for riding. But more importantly, if you fall on the motorcycle, if you have to pick up the motorcycle, you don't want to injure yourself. So think step-ups, quads, upper leg. Think about your midsection, and then shoulders and triceps. And those will get your primary muscle groups that you'll need for riding off-road, for adventure riding.
All right. Guys, we are running out of time, so I'm just going to close the chat box for now. We have to complete the answers for the previous questions that are still in the chat box present. So we are closing the chat box for now. We are just going to answer the questions that are already in the chat box as of right now, okay?
Well, at least as many as we can. There's a lot of questions there.
There's so many questions. Okay, so let me get back to...
But I love that we have people from everywhere, from Mexico, from India, from the United States.
Right.
Where else do we have? What other countries do we have? Oh, I guess you just closed the chat box, didn't you? Oh,
we'll open it later on. We'll open it later on for everyone.
Yeah.
So Suvo, he wants to ask you, hi Bret, according to your suggestion, do you strongly suggest aluminum panniers or soft panniers for a world tour? I'm planning shortly.
Well, that depends. So when I did South America, I had aluminum panniers, absolutely loved them, and they were the right choice. When I rode through Africa, I had soft panniers, and they were the right choice. I would say if I'm on a world trip, I'm not trying to do any crazy riding, because it's about the people, it's about the travel. Aluminum is less inviting for security. It looks safer. It's a lot easier to organize. So I do really like aluminum panniers. but you have to weigh that against the concerns of personal injury if you get trapped underneath it. If you're in traffic, and this has happened in other countries, India not so much, but in countries where I would be on the motorcycle and vehicles would come up and wedge me. And both sides of my bike were actually being touched by the vehicles on both sides while I was stopped in traffic. And soft luggage was very good for that because my bike would squish and then unsquish. And it was very easy to take off. So you have to kind of make the choice of, safety, convenience, price. I see a lot of world travelers using both, and I see soft luggage more and more commonly now in other countries from people who are traveling through them.
All right. Kalyani wants to ask, if you were riding more on trails, then the touring gear will help or need some off-road protection gear? I'm riding more on trails.
The more you ride on trails, the more you should be very thin riding gear. So I wear a touring suit because I'm on the street and I'm off-road, it needs to vent. But the more you're on trails, the more you should get into things like dirt bike pants or jersey type shirts, things where they're a little bit lighter because you don't have as much wind. And then I have a tendency to wear a lot more armor underneath it. But look for massive ventilation because on the trails, you're just not putting the same speed out there. And you're definitely more likely to crash and to hit hard. So having armor that is, and a lot of you wear like the knee protection over your pants on the jeans, and that's always good because it doesn't shift and move around. Off-road, I would try to get gear that is very tight to the body so it doesn't shift when you fall, and maximum ventilation.
Toll wants to ask, what are some drills with our motorcycles, beginner to advanced level, in parking lots or beaches to get better?
Slow speed. I always focus on slow speed because it's the manipulation of the clutch, the throttle, and the brakes that really masters having control of the bike. So again, getting confidence to do those really tight U-turns. It's not that we need to do U-turns all the time, but it's the confidence with the motorcycle and the understanding the balance of the motorcycle that helps that out. So I would definitely do anything where you have to be very precise, where your wheel has to be in a very small, direct spot, where you have very good control, where you have to use the clutch a lot so the bike doesn't tip and fall. So I would focus on precision drills or activities.
All right. V wants to ask, cornering on trails, we weigh the outside of the motorcycle, and on road, we weigh the inside of the motorcycle. Why is that so?
It's not so. It's not true. You'll find some riders will tell you, and I train on racetracks as well. So I understand the concepts of high performance riding there and as well as off-road. The idea of weighting a peg is just the rider thinking of the outcome of what they're actually doing. So again, let's go back to this weightless rider concept. If I'm leaning the motorcycle and it's a slow speed turn, so we're not doing high speed, what happens is I need to be directly above the contact patch. And when I do that, it feels like I'm weighting the outside peg because I'm shifting my weight to the outside of the bike, so I'm over the top of it. When I'm going on a corner to the inside, there should be no weight on the inside of the foot peg. It should actually be on the knee that holds you on the bike. So as the bike leans into the corner, centrifugal force is trying to push the bike upright. So we move down to the inside of the bike so we have balance and so that we are not thrown over the top. So we come down more to the inside. For a lot of riders, because you're down inside the bike so far, they feel the weight down on that inside foot peg. What it should be is on the outside knee. But it's where we're positioning the body so that we can find that neutral position that causes that sensation that we're weighting either the outside peg or the inside peg. In reality, it's not about the feet.
Chiku from Kerala, he wants to ask, I'm riding an Africa Twin for touring and occasional off-roading over highways, gravel, and slush in and around South India. Which one would you suggest me out of the two, Hyde-New K60 or Rally STR?
The Hyde now does one thing and one thing well. It lasts forever. That's the only thing that tire is good for. I've used them for a lot of trips and travels. If I need one tire to last a very long trip, it does okay on road. It's very loud. It does okay in the dirt. It's not really very good at either one of them. So the STS is going to be a better performing tire, but if you want the ultimate mileage, then the Heidenau K60 is king still to this day. Nobody gets better mileage out of it. And we're going to take one more question, and then we'll wrap up after this last one.
Okay,
so pick a good one. Pick a good one. Pressure's on him. If he picks a bad one, you guys all have to tell him.
From Pixel 2, while riding on a loose gravel or rubble block, how should you be your weight distribution while standing and riding the bike? How much loads need to be transferred to the handle? And does holding the tank with knees or thighs help?
You should have no weight on the handlebars, ever. Not going uphill, not going downhill, not in sand, not in corners. You should never have weight on the handlebars. The only reason your hands are touching the handlebars is so that you have the controls at your fingertips, clutch, throttle, and brakes. And you can suggest direction for steering. So that's that if you're moving too far forward and you're feeling the weight on the bars, either the bike isn't set up properly so that you can get into a balanced position, or you're not wedging in or using your knees to balance you on the bike. And the same thing goes true when you're going back. If you're going way to the back of the bike, I should not be holding onto the handlebars. I should be using my legs to wedge into the seat so that I'm still very loose at the bars.
All right, do we have time for one more question?
So that was a great question to close up on, because guys, I have to get on the road because I have a job to do and I have riders waiting for me to train them here in Colorado. But that was a great question to wrap things up with, because again, it goes back to this idea that mindset and understanding dynamics are so critical in your success, because I imagine most of you want to be good riders, but probably more of you want to be masters of your bike. And that's the difference. If you're looking at formulas, at do this, do this, do that, that's still the stage where we're learning to ride the bike and we're still learning to ride well. When you stop thinking about what you do specifically and you think about the forces that are working around you and how to alter those forces and work with those forces, that's when you become the master. And that's the goal we all have.
Perfect. So thank you to all the participants, and apologies for the same, because we have very limited time and it's very difficult to take all in questions in one webinar. We'll be hosting a different webinar with Bret very soon. So stay tuned for that. You can follow Bret. You can follow Bret on the social media platforms given over here for our Instagram handle, Facebook, and the website links. And then you have the Yacht Tours Instagram handle, Facebook, and a YouTube link. We'll be uploading shortly to Bret and then to the Yacht Tours YouTube channel for the Zoom webinar recording. And it was very amazing to host you, Bret. And do you have any words for the participants who joined in?
Just to throw it out here at the end, you're going to be posting, I believe you're posting a copy of this up online. So if they want to watch this again or take notes, then do that. Also, he's going to share a copy of this for those that are friends of mine in America that weren't able to do this and they're not on Facebook. So I'll be posting that up on Bret Tkacs' channel as well. So I recommend, if you're interested in just doing a review, if I talked really fast, which I often do, that you can go back and rewatch some of those questions or comments and do that again. I know you too. Okay, so I love seeing the faces. There's so many faces I see here that I recognize, and I love that. It makes me so excited. It's like coming back. I miss my friends in India.
All right, perfect. Thank you a lot, Bret. So it was really lovely hosting you, and we hope to see you back again in India soon, riding with us.
Excellent. Everybody have a nice evening. For here with me, it's morning, so